Picture this. You walk onto a dealer floor in outer Melbourne on a Saturday morning. Sun's out, coffee in hand, and there they are, rows of brand new, current year motorcycles, still wrapped in that factory plastic, sitting under the same fluorescent lights they rolled in under 8, 10, sometimes 14 months ago. No dust yet, but give it time. These aren't clearance bikes from 3 seasons back. These are 2026 models. Brand new. And they are not moving. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is the place where we talk motorcycles the way your mate at the pub would. If your mate at the pub had spent the last few weeks buried in FCAI sales bulletins, dealer floor plan reports and every bike sales. .com.au clearance page in the country. Today we are doing a list I've wanted to do for a while, and it is not a happy one for a few very famous brands. Australia's motorcycle market is actually in decent shape overall right now. The Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, that's the FCAI, the body that tracks new vehicle sales in this country, released their first half 2026 numbers, and the headline is good news. 46,023 new motorcycles hit Aussie roads between January and June, up 8.2% on the same period last year. Sounds like a boom time, right? Here's the catch. Nearly all of that growth came from one place, off-road. Kids' bikes were up 32%, trail bikes more than doubled, up 131% year-on-year. Meanwhile, road motorcycles, the segment that includes your cruisers, your adventure bikes, your sports bikes, your nakeds, actually went backwards slightly, down 0.5% to just over 16,000 units for the half. Scooters dipped too. So underneath that rosy 8.2% headline is a market where certain categories are absolutely thriving, and others are sitting there, unloved, gathering dealer floor plan interest by the day. And that's before we even get to the global picture. Because two of the biggest names in this industry, names that used to define what a big bike was, are dealing with genuinely serious inventory problems worldwide right now. We're talking about a European manufacturer that's been through insolvency proceedings with reportedly hundreds of thousands of unsold units sitting in warehouses, and an American icon that just told its own investors it's cutting production because dealers are drowning in stock they can't shift. That stuff doesn't stay overseas. It flows straight down into Australian showrooms too. So today, we are counting down 10 brand new motorcycles you can walk in and buy right now in Australia in 2026. Full warranty, finance available, drive-away pricing and all, that are, by every account I can find, rotting on the lots. Some of these are going to surprise you. Some of these you've probably ridden past a dealership and seen sitting in the same spot for the better part of a year. Let's get into it. Quick housekeeping before we start. Smash that like button if you've ever walked onto a dealer floor and had a salesperson practically chase you to the door over a bike nobody else wants. Subscribe if you're new, and let me know in the comments if you own one of these, because I guarantee some of you are about to feel a bit called out. Let's ride. Number 10. Suzuki Hayabusa, the hyperbike nobody's chasing anymore. We are kicking off the list with a bike that used to be the single most desired motorcycle on the planet. The Hayabusa. The bike that was so fast when it launched back in the late 90s that European manufacturers lobbied for a gentleman's agreement to cap top speeds industry-wide. It's a legend. It's a name that even non-riders know. And in 2026, it's parked. Here's the thing about the Hayabusa in the current Australian market. It's a bike built for a version of motorcycling that's shrinking every single year. We are talking a 1,340 cubic centimeters inline-4 hypersports tourer that tips the scales at around 264 kilograms wet, with a price tag that starts north of $28,000 right away and climbs well past $30,000 depending on spec and colorway. That's serious money for a bike whose entire reason for existing is a top speed you can legally use for about 4 seconds on the Hume Highway before highway patrol takes an interest. The road bike segment in Australia was down 0.5% in the first half of 2026, and within that segment, it's the big bore hypersports category taking the hardest hit. Why? A few reasons, and they all stack up against each other. First, insurance. A learner or P-plater cannot touch this bike, obviously. It's nowhere near LAMS legal, but even fully licensed riders are getting insurance quotes that make their eyes water, especially anyone under 30 or with a postcode anywhere near a major city. Comprehensive cover on a Hayabusa for a younger rider can genuinely rival a car repayment. Second, the whole category of does everything, extremely fast, uprightish riding position hyperbike has been quietly eaten alive by the adventure bike boom and the naked bike resurgence. Riders who 20 years ago would have bought a Busa are now buying a mid-size adventure bike they can commute on, tour on, and still have a laugh with on a Sunday, at half the running costs and with a seating position that doesn't wreck your wrists in traffic. Third, and this is the one dealers grumble about most, the Hayabusa is a halo bike. It exists to get people into Suzuki showrooms, so they buy a GSX-8R or a V-Strom instead. Suzuki knows this. Dealers know this. But it means the actual sales targets on the Hayabusa itself were never realistic to begin with, and now with cost of living pressure squeezing discretionary spending across the board, that halo effect is buying fewer showroom visits than it used to. Walk into a Metro Suzuki dealer and ask how long their current year Hayabusa stock has been sitting there. In more than a few cases, you're going to hear since last year's shipment. It's not that the bike's bad. By every technical measure, it's still a masterpiece of engineering. It's that Australia in 2026 has fewer buyers than ever for a $30,000 bike whose whole party trick is a speed you'll never legally use. Number 9. Harley-Davidson Road Glide. The bagger nobody under 50 is buying. Number 9. And I want to be upfront here. Harley-Davidson's own numbers in Australia year-to-date for 2026 are actually up by a healthy 8.5% according to industry trackers. So on paper, you'd think Harley's having a great year here. Dig one layer deeper, though, and a very different picture shows up. Globally, Harley-Davidson has had a genuinely rough run. The company's own investor calls in early 2026 talked about production being deliberately cut below wholesale demand specifically to help dealers work through excess inventory. Their own CEO used the phrase dealer health is uneven on a call with investors. Motor company profits, the core combustion motorcycle business, not the finance arm, reportedly cratered by something like 84% year-on-year in one recent quarter. That is not the language of a brand that's thriving. So how do you square rising Australian volume with a global inventory crisis? Simple. Heavy discounting and aggressive finance offers are doing the heavy lifting on those Australian numbers, and the model taking the biggest hit in terms of sitting on the lot is the big touring bagger. Think Road Glide, Street Glide, that whole family of enormous, fully fared, stall bag-equipped tourers that start around the mid-$40,000s right away and climb well past $55,000 for the higher spec CVO variants. The core problem with this category in Australia specifically is demographic, and it's brutal. The median age of a Harley rider in comparable markets has been reported at over 50, up from the mid-30s back in the 80s. Younger riders, the ones who'll be buying bikes for the next 20 years, are gravitating toward lighter, cheaper, more tech-forward brands. Kawasaki, KTM before its own troubles, Royal Enfield, Triumph's smaller range. A 370-kilogram bagger with a six-figure adjacent running cost, huge dimensions that are miserable to filter through Sydney or Melbourne traffic on, and a fuel bill to match, is a tough sell to anyone who didn't grow up dreaming about it. Dealers in outer suburban and regional areas, the traditional Harley heartland, are reporting these big baggers sitting for extended periods, particularly in less common colorways, while the smaller, cheaper Nightster and Street Bob models move relatively fine. It's the big dollar full dresses that are proving to be the problem child. And Harley itself seems to know it, hence a strategic reset, hence headcount reductions, hence a public commitment to actually reducing how many of these things get built in the first place. Number 8. KTM 1290 Super Adventure, caught in the middle of a global meltdown. Now we get to the big one. If you've followed motorcycle industry news at all over the past 18 months, you already know KTM has been through an absolute nightmare. The Austrian manufacturer went through formal insolvency proceedings, and reporting at the time described inventory levels that are honestly staggering. Figures being thrown around of hundreds of thousands of unsold units sitting in warehouses worldwide, the product of a company that massively overordered parts and overbuilt bikes during the post-COVID boom, banking on demand that never eventuated at the scale they bet on. That crisis sits behind everything happening with KTM stock in Australia right now, and the model wearing it hardest is the flagship 1290 Super Adventure, the big, 1,301 cubic centimeters V-twin adventure tourer that competes directly with the BMW R1300 GS. In Australia, this bike is priced from around $34,000 right away and climbs toward $40,000 for the top-spec model with all the electronic suspension and rally-inspired trim. Here's the awkward bit for KTM Australia. Officially, the brand's local year-to-date numbers actually show growth, up something like 2.5% according to industry trackers. But that headline figure hides the reality on individual model lines. The mid-size KTM adventure bikes, the 890s, the smaller singles, are moving reasonably well because they're cheaper, lighter, and more accessible to a broader range of license categories. It's the big bore flagship, the 1290, sitting on lots the longest, because it occupies the most expensive, most niche corner of an already shrinking big adventure bike segment. Add to that a factor that's specific to KTM right now: buyer confidence. When a manufacturer goes through very public financial restructuring, even once it comes out the other side, there's a hesitancy from buyers about long-term parts supply, warranty backing, and resale value. Nobody wants to be the person who bought a $38,000 motorcycle from a company whose future was, for a period, genuinely uncertain. That hesitancy doesn't show up neatly in a sales chart, but talk to any KTM dealer in this country and they'll tell you it's real, and it's hitting the big flagship adventure bike hardest of all, because that's the bike where a buyer is putting down the most money and taking on the most risk. Number 7. BMW R18, the cruiser that forgot who it was for. Number 7 is one that always surprises people, because on paper, BMW is one of the most respected engineering brands in the world, and it doesn't feel like they should be capable of building a bike that sits unloved on dealer floors. And yet, here we are. The R18 is BMW's big-inch cruiser, built around a genuinely enormous 1,802 cubic centimeters boxer twin, the largest boxer engine BMW has ever put in a production bike, styled to evoke classic 1930s and 40s cruiser silhouettes. It's a gorgeous piece of industrial design in photographs. In person, and on the road, it's a very different story for a lot of Australian buyers. Priced from around $32,000 right away for the base model and climbing well past $40,000 for the transcontinental touring variant with all the hard luggage and fairing, the R18 is trying to compete in a category, the American-style big cruiser, that is fundamentally owned by Harley-Davidson and Indian in the minds of Australian buyers. This is a category where brand heritage and tribal loyalty matter enormously, arguably more than in any other part of motorcycling. A German engineering badge on a cruiser, no matter how well built, is fighting an uphill battle against decades of Harley and Indian mythology that BMW simply doesn't have in this genre. On top of that, at 345 kilograms wet for the base model, the R18 is genuinely one of the heaviest production motorcycles you can buy new in this country. That weight, combined with a fairly narrow rev range and a driving experience that's more stately cruise than engaging ride, puts it in an awkward spot, too expensive and too heavy to appeal to riders wanting something fun and manageable, but without the brand cachet to win over die-hard cruiser buyers who are choosing based on badge as much as engineering. Dealers report the R18 moves in small, steady trickles rather than any kind of consistent demand, and it's not uncommon to find current year stock that's been sitting for the better part of a year, particularly in the higher spec touring configurations where the price gap to an equivalent Harley or Indian touring model becomes even more stark. Number 6. Honda Gold Wing, magnificent, expensive, and slowly becoming a museum piece. Here's a controversial one for the comment section. The Honda Gold Wing is, by any objective engineering measure, one of the greatest touring motorcycles ever built. 6 cylinders on the flagship variant, a level of refinement that genuinely rivals a luxury car, airbag technology on certain models, a stereo system, heated seats, reverse gear for goodness sake. It is an astonishing piece of engineering. It is also, in 2026 Australia, a very tough sell, and here's why. Pricing starts around $37,000 right away for the base Gold Wing and climbs past $45,000 for the Tour DCT variant with the automatic dual-clutch transmission. That puts it firmly in you could buy a decent second-hand car instead territory, competing for the same discretionary dollar as a genuinely serious car purchase, and in a cost-of-living environment where FCAI's own commentary on the 2025 sales year specifically pointed to ongoing pressure on household budgets as a driver of softening demand. A $40,000 plus discretionary motorcycle purchase is one of the first things to get shelved. The Gold Wing's traditional buyer, an older rider, often a couple who tours together, financially comfortable, looking for the ultimate long-distance comfort machine, is exactly the demographic most affected by rising interest rates and cost-of-living pressure over the past couple of years, because it's a demographic more likely to be relying on fixed retirement income or investment returns that have been squeezed. And crucially, it's a demographic that's shrinking every year as those riders age out of motorcycling altogether, with fewer younger buyers coming up who want a full-dress touring bike of this size and cost as their first big purchase. At 379 plus kilograms wet depending on spec, it's also an enormous, intimidating machine for anyone without serious riding experience, which narrows the buyer pool even further. Honda dealers will tell you the Gold Wing sells in single digits per year at most individual dealerships, and current year stock sitting 12 months or more isn't unusual at all. It's a halo bike for Honda in much the same way the Hayabusa is for Suzuki, brilliant, aspirational, and not remotely the volume seller the showroom space it occupies would suggest. Number 5. Kawasaki Ninja H2, supercharged, spectacular, and stuck. Kawasaki's overall Australian numbers for 2026 are actually the worst of the major Japanese brands, down around 6.5% year-to-date according to industry trackers, in a market where Honda and Yamaha are both growing. Something is going on with Kawasaki's local range, and the Ninja H2 family is a huge part of the story. For those who don't know it, the Ninja H2 is Kawasaki's supercharged hyperbike, genuinely one of the most technologically wild production motorcycles on sale anywhere in the world, using an actual centrifugal supercharger to force-feed the engine, producing power figures that sit in genuine hypercar territory. The road-going H2 starts around $34,000 right away, and the track-only, non-road registrable H2 variant is priced well beyond that for a bike you literally cannot ride on the street. This is about as extreme a halo product as motorcycling produces, and that's exactly the problem in the current Australian climate. It's a bike built for a buyer with genuinely serious disposable income, who's likely already owns multiple motorcycles, who wants a piece of engineering theatre as much as a means of transport. That buyer exists in Australia, but there are not very many of them, and the H2 is competing for their attention against an increasingly crowded field of specialty, limited run, and exotic machinery from Ducati, MV Agusta, and others. Combine that tiny buyer pool with a road bike segment that's softening overall, down 0.5% in the first half of 2026, and a supercharged hyperbike becomes one of the hardest things on a Kawasaki showroom floor to actually move. Dealers report H2 stock, particularly in the standard road-going trim rather than the ultra-limited special editions, can sit for extended periods, because the buyer who wants this exact bike, at this exact price, in this exact colorway, is an extremely narrow slice of an already small pool of extreme performance buyers. It's an incredible flex for Kawasaki's engineering department. It is not, by any measure, a volume seller, and with the brand's broader Australian sales sliding, it's one of the more visible symbols of a range that's currently more spectacular than it is sales effective. Number 4, Indian Pursuit, the bagger fighting Harley for a shrinking pie. Number 4 takes us back into the big American touring segment, and this time it's Indian's turn. The Pursuit is Indian's flagship touring bagger, built to go toe-to-toe with Harley's Road Glide and Street Glide, wrapped around Indian's big 1,769 cubic centimeters Power Plus V twin, loaded with a full fairing, hard saddlebags, a premium stereo system and, on the elite variants, some genuinely striking two-tone paintwork. Priced from around $47,000 right away and climbing past $55,000 for the top-spec Pursuit Elite with the larger fairing-mounted infotainment and premium audio package, this is a bike aimed squarely at the same shrinking demographic we talked about with the Harley Road Glide, an older, established rider looking for the ultimate long-haul touring experience, in a category where brand loyalty runs generations deep and switching from Harley to Indian, or vice versa, is almost a cultural decision as much as a purchasing one. The core issue for Indian in this segment is that they're the smaller player fighting for share in a category that's contracting as a whole, not just fighting Harley for a bigger slice of a growing pie. When the entire big touring bagger category is under pressure from an aging buyer base and rising running costs, being the number 2 brand in that shrinking category is a genuinely tough spot to be in. Indian's clearance and ride-away pricing pages have, at various points through 2025 and into 2026, featured aggressive discounting on exactly this kind of large touring model, which tells its own story about how the sell-through is actually going versus the recommended retail price. There's also a practical Australian factor at play: parts and service network density. Harley-Davidson's dealer network in this country, built up over generations, is simply larger and more established than Indian's. For a bike that a buyer expects to tour long distances on, confidence in nearby servicing matters enormously, and that structural disadvantage makes an already difficult sales fight even harder for Indian's big tourers specifically. Number 3. MV Augusta Brutale, a super veloce, gorgeous, exotic, and almost never sold. We are now into genuinely rarefied territory. MV Agusta is one of the most beautiful, most exotic motorcycle brands in the world, Italian engineering and design at a level that regularly wins international design awards, with a heritage stretching back to some of the most successful race bikes in Grand Prix history. It's also a brand that, in the Australian market, sells in numbers so small that dealers will often only stock 1 or 2 units of any given model at any one time, and even those can sit for well over a year before finding a buyer. The Brutale Naked and Super Velo sports models, both built around MV's characterful, high-revving triple-cylinder engines, are priced from around $30,000 right away for entry variants and climb well past $45,000 for the higher-spec RC and Rush variants with carbon bodywork and Öhlins suspension. The fundamental issue here isn't that the bikes are bad. Quite the opposite. They're some of the most engaging, characterful motorcycles you can buy, full stop. The issue is that MV Agusta occupies an almost impossibly narrow slice of the market. Buyers who want genuine Italian exotica, who have the money for Ducati or above pricing, but who specifically want something rarer than Ducati, something that turns heads even at a bike meet full of expensive machinery. That is an extremely small pool of buyers in a country of Australia's population, and it's shrinking further as cost of living pressure squeezes exactly the kind of discretionary luxury spending this brand depends on. There's also a service and parts reality that's impossible to ignore. MV Agusta's Australian dealer footprint is tiny compared to the Japanese majors or even Ducati, which means longer waits for parts, fewer technicians genuinely factory trained on the brand, and a resale market that's thin enough to make some buyers nervous about ever needing to sell. All of that combines to make MV Agusta showroom stock some of the longest sitting, lowest turnover new motorcycle inventory in the entire country, genuinely rotting on lots, just very, very expensive lots. Number 2. Ducati Multistrada V4 Rally, the adventure bike priced like a deposit on a house. Number 2, and we are staying in exotic Italian territory, because Ducati's flagship Adventure Tourer is one of the more eye-watering examples of a genuinely brilliant motorcycle that's priced itself into a corner in the current Australian economic climate. The Multistrada V4 Rally is Ducati's rally-inspired, long-range answer to the BMW GS Adventure, a 1,158 cubic centimeters V4-powered adventure tourer with a genuinely enormous 30-litre fuel tank, semi-active suspension, radar-assisted cruise control and blind spot monitoring, and a level of technology that puts most cars to shame. Australian Motorcycle News covered its arrival with genuine excitement. This is a bike built with real Dakar-adjacent pedigree behind its rally styling. The problem is the price. We are talking right-away pricing that starts north of $42,000 and climbs comfortably past $48,000 depending on accessories and configuration, genuinely into small car, or in some capital cities, house deposit adjacent territory. That's an enormous amount of money to commit to a motorcycle at a moment when FCAI's own commentary has repeatedly pointed to cost of living pressure and discretionary spending caution as the defining forces shaping this market through 2025 and into 2026. The adventure bike segment overall isn't struggling in Australia the way the road segment broadly is. Off-road capable machinery has been one of the genuine bright spots in FCAI's figures. But there's a difference between the booming end of that segment, accessible, mid-capacity, genuinely versatile bikes, and the ultra-premium flagship end that the Multistrada V4 Rally sits at. Buyers chasing adventure bike versatility on a budget are overwhelmingly choosing mid-size options from Kawasaki, Suzuki, Triumph, and KTM's own smaller range, at less than half the price. The buyer left for a $45,000 plus flagship Ducati adventure bike is an extremely specific, extremely wealthy enthusiast, and there simply aren't enough of them walking through Australian Ducati showrooms to shift the numbers dealers were hoping for when they ordered stock. Limited run variants and special editions move reasonably on novelty and exclusivity alone. It's the standard rally spec sitting in showroom colors that dealers report as the long-term floor space occupier. Number 1. Harley-Davidson Trikes, the biggest who is this actually for on any lot in the country. And here we are. Number 1. The bike that had me laughing when I first properly looked into it, because Harley-Davidson's own marketing for the 2026 model year describes this as the biggest update since we launched our trike lineup nearly 20 years ago. A redesign. A relaunch. A whole new era, according to the press release. We're talking about Harley's three-wheeled trike range, the Tree Glide and Freewheeler models, built on the same big touring platforms as the Road Glide and Street Glide, but with two wheels out back instead of one, aimed at riders who want the touring comfort and presence of a full-dress Harley without the balance and low-speed handling demands of a traditional two-wheeler. Priced from around $58,000 right away and climbing well past $65,000 for the higher-spec CVO trike variants, this sits at the absolute top of the price ladder for anything we've covered today, and it occupies possibly the narrowest buyer demographic in all of motorcycling. Riders, almost exclusively older, who either can no longer confidently balance a traditional heavyweight cruiser, or who simply prefer the stability and cruiser lounge experience a trike offers, and who have the $60,000 plus budget to indulge that preference on a brand new, top-of-the-range machine rather than a cheaper trike conversion. That is an almost impossibly small overlap of criteria in the Australian market. It's a category that exists almost entirely to retain aging, loyal Harley customers who might otherwise leave motorcycling altogether as their balance and confidence decline with age, which is a genuinely thoughtful piece of product strategy from Harley's perspective, keeping a lifelong customer on a Harley rather than losing them to four wheels entirely. But it means the total addressable buyer pool, at this price point, in this country, in any given year, is tiny. Add in everything we've already covered about Harley's broader global inventory pressures, dealer floor plan concerns, and a company explicitly cutting production to manage excess stock, and you land on a category, the flagship, freshly redesigned, $60,000 plus trike, that represents the single hardest new motorcycle to move off an Australian dealer floor in 2026. Dealers who carry them at all typically stock just one, sometimes as a genuine showroom centerpiece more than an expectation of quick turnover, and it's not unusual for that one unit to represent the longest sitting piece of new inventory on the entire premises, regardless of brand. It is, in every sense, the number one entry on this list, the newest, the most expensive, the most heavily marketed as a whole new era, and quite possibly the motorcycle least likely to find a buyer in Australia this year. So there you have it, 10 brand new, currently in showroom motorcycles that, by every account from dealers, industry data, and market trends, are having a genuinely tough time finding buyers in Australia in 2026. What's fascinating putting this list together is how consistent the underlying story is, even across wildly different brands and price points. An aging traditional buyer base for big cruisers and tourers, a genuinely difficult couple of years for a couple of major global manufacturers dealing with real financial and inventory pressure, and a broader shift in what Australian riders actually want, with off-road and mid-size, accessible bikes booming while the big-ticket flagship end of the market softens. None of this means these are bad motorcycles. In fact, several of the bikes on this list are among the most impressive pieces of engineering the industry produces. It just means that impressive and sells well in the current Australian climate are, right now, two very different things. I want to know what you think. Did I miss one? Is there a bike you've watched sit on a dealer floor in your area for what feels like forever? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this list surprised you even once, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more riders. Subscribe if you're new here. We've got more of these deep dives coming, and I will catch you in the next one. Ride safe.